Hi, I'm Brandon Dawson, and this is The Distiller, a podcast about how we find meaningful work and how we find meaning in the work we do. Today's guest is chef and restaurateur Derek Dos Anjos, owner and head chef of the Anchor OTR in Cincinnati's Over-the-Rhine neighborhood. You may remember that we recorded our very first episode with Dan Corman at the Anchor back in 2017. Well, Derek is now a guest on the show. We met him at Old Kentucky Bourbon Bar in Covington, Kentucky. If you're a fan of Kentucky bourbon, and both Derek and I are, there may be no better place on earth to sample the full spectrum of bourbons than OKBB. We sipped glasses of Woodford Reserve's double oaked bourbon as we talked about Derek's path coming up in restaurants, being trained and guided by his mentor in New York, and eventually making the decision to leave the city and move back home to Ohio to open his own place. The Anchor is perennially voted as the best seafood restaurant in Cincinnati. And while you may not think the Midwest has much to say about seafood, Derek's rigorous practices of sourcing only the best and most sustainable seafood result in a menu that rivals any you'll find on the coasts. And it boasts his famous lobster rolls from New England to Cincinnati via Brooklyn and the West Village. My favorite part of this conversation was hearing Derek talk about what he learned coming up that kind of sets him apart as a chef and an owner. And it wasn't one great recipe. It wasn't some specific kitchen skill. It's a particular orientation to the people he works with and who work for him. I won't give it away. I'll let Derek tell you himself. Here's our conversation with Chef Derek Dos Anjos on The Distiller. Derek, first of all, thank you for being willing to be on the show.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate it. You were the host for our first episode.
Yeah.
Now you're back as a guest.
As a guest.
It's great to have you on the show. I'm excited to hear a little bit about your story. And as everybody can hear, it's Friday afternoon. We're at Old Kentucky Bourbon Bar in Covington, Kentucky. There's a little bit of noise going on in the background. But it's a lively spot, and we're going to have a lively discussion, and it's all good.
Yeah. So, the pros are here.
All the pros you were asking, like who shows up at 2 o'clock on a Friday? It's the pros.
It's pregame.
Let's start off a little bit and tell us. I want to get into the discussion of the Anchor and everything that led to that, but I also want to know a little bit about you from your background. You're an Ohio boy, raised just north of Cincinnati in Wilmington. Is that right?
I was raised in Wilmington, Ohio. I was born in Xenia, Ohio, which is about a half hour north.
Okay.
My father is Brazilian, and my mother is from Wilmington, Ohio. Dairy farm girl.
All right.
And I was
Midwestern gal.
Yeah, 6 months old. They met at Wilmington College. I was 6 months old, and we moved to Brazil.
Okay.
So I spent the first 6.5 years of my life living as a Brazilian boy.
Where in Brazil?
Vitória, Espírito Santo, which is about 300 miles north of Rio.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you lived there until you were how old?
About 6.5.
Do you still speak Portuguese?
No. I was just talking to someone about this the other day. We moved back here. I could speak English, but I refused to until I realized that the teachers weren't going to let me out for recess. And I was like,
so you played along?
I played along. I said, well, if that's the case, then we're speaking English and only English.
Right.
And
get with the program.
Get with the program. So I understand some Portuguese. I've been back a few times and can order dinner, get a taxi, that kind of thing.
Just enough. Right.
Yeah.
Right on. So you grew up in Wilmington in Xenia. You went to college in
I went to Earlham College in Richmond, Indiana.
Okay.
So with a sociology, anthropology degree.
So up to this point, did you have dreams of working in the food industry?
No dreams.
Okay.
But loved food. Sort of grew up eating really great food, whether it was out of the garden cooked by my mom and my grandmother, or whether it was as a very, very young kid in Brazil eating seafood on the coast in Vitória.
Okay.
Sort of had really good fond memories of that.
Right on. And did you cook when you were younger?
I attempted cookouts, grilling steak, burgers, that kind of thing, but didn't really touch on the culinary side of it. But back then, that wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
People didn't go to culinary school.
Right, certainly not like it is now.
No.
Yeah. And then straight out of college, moved to Chicago.
Straight out of college, moved to Chicago.
To do what?
I didn't know.
Okay. Just to get out?
It was sort of the summer right after college.
All right.
I had a girlfriend there, and I couldn't find a job even as a baristas weren't a thing, but I couldn't get a job at a coffee shop, basically.
Yeah.
So eventually made my way back to Cincinnati after a few months in Chicago, and got a job as in a kitchen here on Main Street. I don't think the place is definitely not there anymore. Main Street Cafe, making sandwiches.
Nice.
And then realized that, like, okay, I can do this for money.
Right.
Walked into the Phoenix, and they hired me on the spot, and I was there, what they call garde-manger, which working in making salads and desserts.
Okay.
And
No only experience at that point was making sandwiches on Main Street.
I was making $5.50 an hour, maybe a little bit more, but.
So this wasn't like I've got a dream and this is where I'm going to start at the bottom of the ladder.
No, this was I need to pay rent,
Yeah.
otherwise I have to move back home, and I was not doing that.
So at some point though, you connect to it.
Right. So after about 6-7 months, there was an English chef at the Phoenix at the time. His name was Paul Teal. They had decided that the people that owned the Phoenix were going to open up a restaurant called Plaza 600 at the new Aronoff Center, which is now NADA. Mm-hmm. And they were bringing in this chef named Jimmy Gibson, who had worked at the Phoenix previously. And I thought, well, I want to go do that.
Right.
So, and that was my first experience with like big city cooking.
Okay.
He had just come back from New York, and again, I was still sort of low person on the totem pole, but I wanted to be the saute cook. I wanted to be the grill cook, and I was able to sort of work my way through each station and experience.
But you really
that.
did start from the ground up. Not even like culinary school and you come in as small place as sous chef, but you are ground up from the very beginning.
And I had mentioned to Jimmy at the time, I'd really like to do this. He goes, well, you got to read some books. Mm-hmm. And I thought, whoa, what do you mean read books? Like, he's like, go get some cookbooks. So I spent my paycheck at Barnes & Noble's looking through cookbooks and figuring out what I wanted to do.
What did you enjoy? What did you connect with?
Well, I really wanted to go to New York and cook. I was told that was sort of the culinary center of the world at the time. Mm-hmm. And my current girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, Julians Dos Anjos, had moved to New York. And so I spent a year here in Cincinnati working and saving my money, and then I moved to Brooklyn. Okay. And that was like a kid getting out of a spaceship and landing in a different
one small step for man.
World. Yeah.
You're how old at this point?
I was 22, 23 years old.
Okay.
Yeah.
Stepping into Brooklyn.
I believe I packed my pickup truck up and drove it to Brooklyn and thought, what the hell am I doing? And was very scared. And it was one of those things where, like, I went looking for a job.
This is also Brooklyn before Brooklyn was sexy.
Brooklyn before Brooklyn was sexy.
Yeah.
It was one of those things where, like, in order to get an apartment, you had to have a bank account. In order to have a bank account, you needed a job.
Right.
In order to get a job, you needed a place to live. I don't really remember how I resolved those things, but I just remember thinking, this is insane.
But here I am.
So my first job was actually working in the cafeteria of the Chase Manhattan Bank on Wall Street.
Wow.
And I had to get up, take the subway at like 4 a.m. And it was all Haitian cooks in the kitchen. And I definitely was the odd person out. But I stuck it out for a few months, and I sort of gained that New York mentality and was able to get my bearings in the subway. Yeah. And after work, because I'd get off work around 2, I would take my resume with 3 restaurants on them, and 2 of those were in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I would hand them to walk into restaurants. Because this was before the internet.
Yeah.
This was before Craigslist, or you really had to hit the pavement. And I got a job at this really cool place in Soho called Monzu. And I didn't work there very long because it wasn't a very good situation, but it was Adam Perry Lang, who's now opening a restaurant, a steakhouse in LA. He's been on Food Network shows, and he was the chef there. And so I sort of got that New York experience. But I sort of had my eye on this place called Pearl Oyster Bar.
Why?
Because it was all seafood. And that's what I felt like I really wanted to do. Okay. And I had walked in and talked to the chef, and they were like, well, it's just the 2 of us, and we're not hiring. We only do 1 service a day.
We don't need anybody.
We don't need anybody.
Yeah.
And So I said, okay, well, here's my resume. And I left. And a few weeks later, maybe it was a month later, I looked in the Village Voice, and there was a review of Pearl Oyster Bar, and it said at the very bottom that they were going to open for lunch if they could find some help.
Wow.
So I got off work, and I went straight down there, and I said, I'm your guy.
Right on.
And she's like, okay. So I was their first employee, and I sort of got to do everything. You know, I was the oyster shucker, the prep guy, the lunch line guy. I did the dishes. I took in the orders that came in the morning, and all these people started coming in. It was a very small place. I think there were 28 seats, and 12 of them were at a counter at the bar. The rest of them, there was 2 tables, and the rest of them were on another counter behind. And they'd be like, there's this guy out there, his name's Mario Batali. Or, you know, there's, and I had no idea who these people were.
Guy, yeah.
And he wasn't even a thing yet.
Right.
But Calvin Trillin, Ruth Reichl, all these sort of literary, culinary people were coming in. And I was like, this is pretty cool.
Was that because just where it was, or was it because the place was really making a name for itself?
It was making a name for itself. It was 2 independent women that were sort of pumping out this New England style seafood that you really didn't get anywhere outside of New England. And it was very simple. You know, there was nothing, the menu was grilled vegetables, grilled fish, lobster rolls, oysters, clams, steamers, chowder, blueberry pie. I mean, Sundays,
Just the real stuff.
it was the real
No fluff,
stuff.
yeah.
No fluff. And it was quite an experience. Towards my second year there, which seemed like an eternity in some ways, the partnership between the 2 owners fell out.
Okay.
Rebecca Charles and Mary Redding were the owners, and I felt like I was caught in the middle a bit. You know,
Understandably.
I worked really hard, and all of a sudden I was being asked to choose sides.
Yeah.
Not really, but it felt that way. So I decided at that point that maybe cooking wasn't my thing.
Really?
And I had worked with this kid at Pearl, his name was Edward Thornton III, and his father was the mayor of San Antonio.
Okay.
And we called him Ted. Ted's girlfriend was a higher up at Viacom, and she was like, "Hey, if you want to come work for us at MTV."
Seriously?
Yeah, seriously. And I was like, really? How much does it pay? It paid $150 a day, which was more than I ever made in any kitchen.
Right.
I said, sure.
Timing is perfect.
Timing's
because
perfect.
You get out of this relationship.
So I jumped ship, and I became a production assistant it was 1998, 99. So Y2K was a thing. Chris Rock was big. Snoop Dogg, all of that stuff. And it was fun.
Kind of the height of the era of
Height
MTV
of
producing
MTV.
their own content and getting away from videos and all that
TRL was a thing.
Yeah,
Carson
yeah.
Daly.
Yep.
I ended up driving a box truck around Manhattan for video sets and stuff like that. But had some really neat experiences. Got to sit in a room with Annie Lennox and Dave Stewart talking about the making of Sweet Dreams.
Wow.
Hanging out with Michael Stipe while they were talking about making his videos. So it was fun.
Yeah.
But it didn't
Some
last.
heady stuff.
Heady stuff.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately working with my hands and being in the restaurant was really where my heart was. And went back one day in Brooklyn and ran into a friend. He's like, hey, we're opening a restaurant here on Fifth Avenue, which back then you didn't go to Fifth Avenue. And it was called Vox, and it was a French restaurant. The guys that opened it up worked for David Waltuck, who owned Chanterelle in Soho, which was a critically acclaimed restaurant at the time.
So it's going to be something special.
So it's going to be something special, and so
You made the jump.
I made the jump and was their grill cook for a year, and loved it. Made some of my best friends there. Then the timeline goes. I went to decided it was 2000. Jocelyn and I moved to Chicago. Decided to get away from New York.
Okay.
And that was probably 6 years into my experience in New York.
All right.
Just a plan to, again, I still, wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I had a friend there whose father was a retired fireman who had his own sort of construction, carpentry business. And so I started working for him.
Okay.
And
but not in food.
Not in food again. And that was a way of having a job once I moved back to Chicago.
But the plan, at that point, you'd been out of food, you'd worked for MTV for how long?
Maybe 6 months, 7 months, something like that.
And when you got back into the restaurant in Brooklyn, you have the idea now this is actually what I want to do. Like you got a chance to step out, and you decided no, that's actually where my heart is.
Right.
So the Chicago move.
Chicago move was eventually going back into the kitchen, but sort of needed a job right away.
Okay.
And after I think about 3 or 4 months, I landed a job as the sous chef at a place called Bistro Zinc. Okay. It's still there. It is open breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So it was quite a kick in the face to be the sous chef for that place because you were required to be there
the whole time.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So what about these early experiences in food did you really gravitate toward? I mean, you said when you were young you liked food, and what pulled you in those first experiences?
I think it was the camaraderie. It was working with your hands. It was creating something out of nothing and being able to show somebody and getting an immediate reaction from it. It's either good or it's not good. And and it was exciting as well.
Yeah, I've heard Bourdain. I was just listening to him on something else where he was basically talking about it as performance. There's no delayed knowledge
it's immediate,
about whether
right.
you know every day if you did it right.
Right.
Yeah.
And growing up on a farm, I still have a great work ethic, and that fulfilled that part for me. Okay. Getting up every day, going in, knowing what I had to do, and the beauty of it was that I didn't have someone standing over me, hounding at me. I was able to prove to them my worth on a daily basis, and I was rewarded for it.
Do you think those opportunities, like the way that you got in, still exist anymore? I mean, with what food has become, with the Food Network and cooking shows and celebrity chefs, can you still break in?
You can. You can, but you have to want to do it. I got a phone call yesterday from a kid that we all know, Drake Kammerer.
Oh, really?
Wants to be a cook, wants to be a chef.
I love it.
And so we're going to bring him in on our busiest night to shuck oysters and show him what it's about.
That's fantastic.
Because it's not glamorous. And a lot of these kids, when they go to culinary school, think that they're going to go out and make $60,000 to $80,000 a year. And it's not the case. They're making $10 to $14 an hour.
Well, a lot of them end up, running somebody's cafeteria or something like that. There just aren't those jobs. The New England Culinary Institute, I had some association and knew what was going on there for a while. And I think a lot of those kids got in there with the idea that they were going to be Mario Batali. Yeah. And they end up smoking a lot of weed for a couple of years and then running somebody's cafeteria.
Right, and then realizing that it's actually work.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
exactly. It's not just instant celebrity and 6 figures.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer in the Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hour thing that you have to put in the time to, on the back end to be an expert.
Right.
And
so along those lines, because that points at mastery. In those early experiences in the place in the village, in those subsequent experiences, what did you learn? Like, what were the specific things that you picked up in every one of those experiences?
I learned how to run a business. I learned how to react to situations that were intense and that were, these people work their butts off. They're tired. They're there to please the customer, but at the same time, they have to cut the check at the, so the produce and the electric get paid.
Yep.
And watching that balance and seeing the stress that it puts on a small business owner, I think has led me to be successful because I'm able to take those, people are like, well, you're so level-headed and you're cool about stuff. It's like, well, I've seen what can happen if you're not.
Right.
You know.
Right. Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it's just food. It's not brain surgery.
Right.
We're not. Lives don't depend. I mean, they depend on it, but
Yeah.
nobody's gonna die.
Yeah, totally. It's funny though, because I expected that you would say, whatever, knife skills, and for you to say, it's really interesting for you to say, I learned how to run a business, not I learned how to make a perfect bechamel, or I learned how to make like whatever. That is really, number one, it points at what you're doing now,
Right.
which is sort of that combination of running a restaurant and being a chef.
Right.
That you can't do that without the business sense.
Right. I mean, I think a lot of people get in over their heads. I can do this. I know my menu. I'm going to cook it.
Mm-hmm.
I know what food cost is. I know what labor cost is about. And that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's a whole other side, a business side of it that has to be attended to.
That's savvy. I want to spend some time on that, but I want to bring us up to present first.
Okay,
so Chicago,
a long year, 10 months, 12 months there. Most of it was wintertime, lots of snow, lots of work.
Mm-hmm. Three services a day.
3 services a day. My good friend Mary Redding, who was partnered with Rebecca Charles at Pearl Oyster Bar, had started an offshoot called Mary's Fish Camp.
Okay.
And she'd heard through a mutual friend that maybe I wasn't so happy in Chicago. Mm-hmm. So she called and she offered a job to be her sous chef at Mary's Fish Camp.
Back in New York.
And it had only been open for about 3 months and open to critical acclaim and a lot of success. Again, it was a very small place. Strong female owner, which was Mary, and chef. And she just needed someone who had her back. Mm-hmm. And so we moved, load up the U-Haul in the middle of the night and go straight back to New York.
Wow. At this point in our recording, unfortunately, we ran into a technical glitch and we lost some audio. Derek was just in the process of describing his move back to New York City a month before September 11th, 2001, and taking a job at Mary's Fish Camp in the West Village. Mary's Fish Camp is one of a couple places in New York famous for their lobster rolls, and we pick back up with Derek telling us why lobster rolls became such a big thing in New York in the first decade of the 2000s, and why Mary's Fish Camp and Pearl's Oyster Bar were the 2 places that got it right.
And so everybody wanted to compare who has the better lobster roll.
Right.
Really, those 2 places were sort of the genesis for lobster rolls all over the country. And 2004, 2005, when the bottom fell out of Wall Street, Wall Streeters weren't spending money on homes and boats and cars. Lobster prices had fallen, so it was a luxurious item that they could afford. So people were all on lobster rolls, which sort of brought in Luke's Lobsters, which is now world famous. I think I got a American Express ad that had Luke's Lobsters, had his picture on it. You know what I mean? Like, these are people that...
It turned into a really big deal outside of Manhattan. Right.
And what I want to say here, it's one of those things where everyone thinks that it's easy to duplicate, but outside of Mary Redding and Rebecca Charles and a few other people, nobody else has the ability to do what they have done.
Yeah, it's one of those things in life that looks simple and is not.
It is not.
And when you find the right thing, when you get the real deal.
It was a timing thing as well, you know.
Yeah. So this relationship with Mary, she is.
She's a mentor.
Yeah, and a conscious one. She said that she wants to be that for you. She has not just taken you under her wing practically, but she said, I want to invest in you. And
Right, so then in 2006, we decided to partner up and open an offshoot of Mary's Fish Camp in Brooklyn.
Okay.
And we find a location in Park Slope, and we built it out together, and we opened in 2006, I believe. It was August. And our opening night, we had a fire above the restaurant and burned the place down.
Wow.
Yeah. Actually, the place didn't burn down. What actually happened was...
Talking about dealing with adversity.
Yeah. So the apartment above us caught on fire, and the fire department came in and threw a ton of water into there, and it all came down into our space.
Yeah.
So it took us another 4 months to fix everything and reopen. But yeah, that was a definite stab through the heart. Having gone through 9/11 and then a fire, it's like every time I hear a fire truck, hairs in the back of my neck stand up.
PTSD.
Yeah,
from all that. Yeah.
it was definitely a night I'll never forget.
Wow.
That's for sure. But we opened and reopened, and that winter, Time Out New York came out with their best of issue and gave us the Best New Brooklyn Restaurant Award, which was huge.
Fantastic. Yeah.
And
now this place, the Brooklyn place, the Village place, the original place still exists. You're running the Brooklyn place. This is effectively your restaurant?
Correct.
Okay.
And I'm also a co-owner of that restaurant.
Right.
Yeah, so great success in the beginning. And then like anything, financial crisis, I think Bush won a second term in office.
Yeah.
It just sort of petered out.
Yeah, all of these factors.
Yeah, so 7 years in, and 2 kids in, Jocelyn and I decide that we would like to move back to Ohio, back to Cincinnati, where rent isn't $5,000 a month and daycare isn't $2,000 a month.
Yeah.
And
Brooklyn at that point is only just taking
it's
off.
It's skyrocketing.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget the first day back in Cincinnati. I opened up the New York Times, and there's this giant article about Brooklyn being the center of the universe for art and commerce and everything. And I was like, what have I done? I was sitting in a parking lot. It's 150 degrees, and
luckily, all these years later, now you're seeing the New York Times articles about Over the Rhine being the center of the universe.
So we get here in 2011 in August, and then by September 2012, we found a location, built it out, and had opened the Anchor.
Okay.
And we decided to open in Over the Rhine because it reminded us of Brooklyn, 1, and 2. There was sort of a renaissance happening down here. Buildings were being revitalized, and we wanted to be a part of that.
For listeners that are outside of Cincinnati and don't know, we've talked about Over the Rhine before, but Over the Rhine is a neighborhood just north of downtown in Cincinnati, the largest intact historical district in the United States. Really beautiful neighborhood that has undergone a renaissance not unlike Brooklyn in the last 10, 12 years, and is now kind of some of the most desirable place to live. But you guys were, it's funny, our first episode was with Dan Corman, which was recorded at the Anchor. I was talking to Dan about opening up his store, Park and Vine, and sort of being a pioneer there on Vine Street. You guys sort of pioneered a bunch of restaurants that now exist on Race Street. There's probably 15.
Yeah, we were number 4 that opened. Yeah. And just to go back to what you were saying about the similarity between Over the Rhine and Brooklyn, the only other place that has this much Italianate architecture is Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Over the Rhine and Brooklyn. So that's
which is why they're filming movies set in historic Brooklyn in Over the Rhine, like Carol and the Gotti movie that's about to come out. Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about that transition before we move into the Anchor. I want to talk a little bit more about the learning and about what shapes your career there, because I think a lot of people think, I imagine people that are listening to the podcast, some of them are potentially dissatisfied in what they're doing.
Sure.
Some of them think, well, God, if I could do anything I wanted to do, I'd open a restaurant.
Right.
Who have no idea what that actually takes. You've already said that some of the things that you learned that were most important were actually how to run a business. But talk about the different skills that it takes, because there's the food skills.
Sure.
Like you might have all the business sense in the world, you might just not have any taste.
But if you can't cook, right.
Yeah. So how do you develop those skills, and what's most important as you're coming up in your career? Are there milestones that you remember where you suddenly thought, oh, I'm actually pretty good at this?
Well, I remember specifically feeling like, when I became the chef at Mary's Fish Camp, I was like, holy cow, like she's handing me the keys to her Ferrari, essentially. Like, she's letting me run the ship here.
Yeah.
And I better be a guy who's like on it and knows what she wants and produces the same food that she would make.
Yep.
You know, it wasn't about my voice per se. It was about her voice because it was her place. And then once we moved over to Brooklyn, I was able to say, hey, I go to this Thai place every Sunday and they make this amazing dish. I'm going to try and replicate it because I feel like it goes well with our type of seafood. And, you know, going out, eating dinners at with different, you know, in different restaurants by different chefs, I was able to create my own voice. Right. I knew what I like to eat, and that's the food that I was producing.
But you got to do that because you spent the years taking seriously your responsibility to accomplish somebody else's vision.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which I think is true in almost every career. Like, you spend the time doing something for somebody else, and then maybe you eventually get to the time to do your own thing.
Right. If you look at the way I develop a menu, and you look at the way Mary develops a menu, we'd probably say, well, they're the same thing. They are the same thing. But there's little nuances. There's my personality and there's her personality.
Yep.
I feel like I've been successful because a lot of the food, a lot of the way I see food has a more feminine perspective than a masculine perspective. I don't have, my food isn't heavily, it's not sauce laden. I don't use a lot of butter. I like things that have more acid. My presentations are cleaner. You know, being more reserved on the plate is more important to me. No more than 3 to 4 things on a plate.
You're not trying to overwhelm the diner.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that comes directly from her cooking.
It's interesting. I've never thought about food in that sense.
Her cooking
before.
comes from Rebecca Charles' cooking, which is a blueberry pie is a blueberry pie, or clam chowder is 4 ingredients. You know, it's
done perfectly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of places that you go to or that are successful now have, you know, a lot of French technique, a lot of different flavors on the plate, ingredients from all over the world, and that's just not who I am as a chef. But yeah, so I picked those things up from simple is better, and you know, not overwhelming the diner with something.
Great ingredients.
Yeah.
Prepared perfectly.
Right.
Get out of the way.
Let a tomato be a tomato.
Yep. Yeah. What is the difference between a great home cook and a serious
Multitasking.
Really?
Yeah.
Say more about that. Like,
so a great chef is able to put his vision on a group of people. They produce the food. He or she has to make sure that food is coming out of the kitchen exactly the way that he or she has told the cooks to do it, all while listening to the dining room and the server, and, you know, did something not come in that needed to come in? How do we adjust to that? You know, let's say the grapes are all moldy and now our grape dessert plate has got to change, and what decisions do we make, and what life experiences have we had to make that decision?
Right. When has this happened before? Adjusting on the fly.
I was on vacation in wherever, and I had this, and I think it might go good with this, and it's also listening to other people. I feel like a home cook really has their vision, and that's it. But right? I mean, they go to a cookbook and they say, I'm going to make that roast chicken this way. I'm not going to listen to anybody else. I'm going to make it that way.
Right.
Whereas a chef has to say, there's the sous chef, there's the maitre d', there's the servers who are saying, nobody likes that. You got to make it this way.
I can't sell that.
You can't sell it. You got to take all that into account in order for a good dish to come out.
So you're just as much coach, team leader,
and being in a kitchen, it's really, you got a band of misfits, right? Because nobody has enough money to pay for the guy who's straight out of culinary school that has their head put together and knows what they're doing with their life. So you've got, the coaching aspect, but also you have to be a priest and a judge and a policeman and
a referee
and a therapist.
Wow.
It's heavy stuff.
Yeah.
It is. We used to say it all the time, like, this is not It's not easy. But you have to have the temperament for it.
Right. What is of the people that you know that do it well, is there a particular temperament that's suited well to it, a particular set of traits or characteristics?
Everyone says, oh my gosh, that chef's a yeller or a thrower, throws things and yells at people. I never see those as successful restaurants. They might have good food, the chef might be well known, but at the end of the day, does he or she have their employees' backs? Do the employees have his or her back? Do they believe in the mission of the restaurant? I mean, I think a good telling aspect of that is when you go into a place and people have worked there for a long time. You go back time and time again, it's the same people.
Yep.
And a place that doesn't have a lot of staff turnover.
Yeah. I've only worked, my second job was as a busboy, and that doesn't count at a Murray Callender's. I spent a couple of years working for a married couple who owned a small European bakery in Idaho and cared, same thing, perfect ingredients, get out of the way of them. But they had hourly employees, they had people that were making $9 an hour that had worked for them for 14 years.
Yeah.
I mean, that spoke more than anything else about what they were and what they were building.
I mean, kitchens are hot, they're sweaty, it's hard work, you're on your feet, and I have to convince these people to do it for $12, $13, $14 an hour.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so you're, everything you said, you're part drill sergeant, you're counselor, confidant, leader. Right. Yeah, and you're continuing to do that because you're bringing in Drake Kammerer to shuck oysters.
I mean,
on
we're
Friday
gonna see like, maybe that physics class at Ohio State isn't as bad as I think it is.
Right.
That 8 o'clock class or whatever.
Right. Compare that experience, your experience, to the prevalence of culinary schools. When people come out of a culinary school, do you have to completely retrain them?
You do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's nice that they have a baseline of, what's what, but they literally don't know anything. They...
about how to apply that in the real world.
Yeah, I mean, they're in school. They get up at 9 o'clock, they go to class, they do their work, they know their stuff, but working in a restaurant isn't that.
Yeah.
It's 2 o'clock to 1 a.m., and then you get up and do it again.
Right.
Or you go out with your friends, and then you go to bed at 4, and then you get up at noon, and then you do it again.
Yeah. That's always...
It's hard.
Yeah, that's another thing about it, is that it's got just as much in common with sort of an entertainment lifestyle. You're living the same schedule.
Right.
You're awake at night. You're sleeping during the day.
Right.
You're having to perform.
When everybody else is having fun, you're working.
Right. You're part of that culture that supports everything else that happens. When I used to travel for a living and tour manage, I used to have late at night driving. I used to have this mental imagination that I could see a map of the United States, and it was all the people who were awake and doing the support work while everybody else was asleep. It was this culture that was sort of overlaid over the top of the culture, and that's very much a part of that, because it's this whole support structure that's making everybody else's lifestyles possible.
Yeah.
So these days, how much of that are you still doing? In your role now as a restaurateur, that sounds to me, I think the Anchor is a larger scale than either of those places that you've described.
Yeah, so Brooklyn Fish Camp did not have, it had, I believe, 45 seats, and then there were another 20-seat patio in the back. This is 75 seats inside and another 50 seats outside. Okay. So it's huge.
Yeah.
And this September will be 6 years open for business, and it's running. We've hired a chef and a general manager, and they know what they're doing, and it's basically running itself.
Right on. Are you still cooking there?
I'm not.
Okay.
Yeah, our chef Stephen Shockley does the cooking.
Is that good, or do you miss it? Are you at the point in your career where you're no, that's totally fine.
It is totally fine with me. I think that's the intention.
Okay.
Is that somebody else comes in and does our vision.
Right.
You've
got now the guy that's accomplishing your vision.
Right.
Yeah, and he's at that place in his career.
I mean, somebody else had said to me the other day, well, I go in, you're never there. And I'm like, I'm there every day, one. And two, you didn't see the 5 years of doubles I pulled.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, totally. If you put your time
I've got no shame in saying, hey, you do this now, and this is how I want it done. And,
right.
And, you know.
And also, did you enjoy your meal?
Yeah, right. Was it good?
Then I'm doing my job.
Right. But, you know, people do like to see the owner of the place around, so, you know, I understand that.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so the idea is, you know, a bar somewhere else that's affiliated with the
Oh, that's
Anchor.
your next idea?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
They're going to put a soccer stadium 2 blocks away. So,
seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the previous guest to you, Corbin Bone. We were talking about all of that, but that's all dropping right into your neighborhood.
It was like Christmas when they announced
imminently.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. What, three blocks from you, the MLS?
No, it's going to be 2.
Seriously?
Yeah, so the entrance will be on Central.
That's crazy.
To the stadium, according to the drawing I saw.
Yeah.
So it's even a block closer.
You pretty much expanded. As far as I know, in that building, you can't add seats or anything like that. So it's expand to another spot?
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me about that. What's the idea for that?
Well, I think like an old school bar with really good bar food.
Okay.
You know, nothing fancy. You know, it doesn't have to be a sports. It's not going to have like a theme per se, but it will be. Oh my God, those were really good chicken wings. What was that flavor?
Right. This is the thing I've had a million times, but it's the best I've ever had it.
Right. So
your relationship to food now, your seafood has been for your entire career kind of where you're at.
Yeah.
The Anchor is, it's not by my opinion. I mean, you guys won the best seafood restaurant and the best raw bar in Cincinnati 2012, 13, 14.
All the way to this year.
All the way to this year.
Which we didn't win.
Oh, really?
We got second place.
Oh, sorry to
okay.
rub salt in your wounds.
No,
there.
that's all right.
But still,
I'll tell you who did win, which was interesting, was not Mitchell's. It's the Bonefish Grill.
Really?
Yeah, so it's a giant corporate
Right, that says more about Cincinnati than it does about you.
Well, I just think that they have a bigger platform.
Yeah. It's always surprised me that, like, look at the Yelp reviews for, like, great vegetarian food in some restaurant, and McDonald's comes up on the Yelp reviews or something like that. It has more to do with what Cincinnatians are rating and what they think they have the right to expect than it does with the quality of the actual restaurant that you're seeing.
Cincinnati's funny. It's like Terry said that she wanted a resume or a CV, and I thought, well, just Google me. And then I thought, oh shit, maybe I should Google me first.
Right.
So I did.
It's there.
So I did, and one of the first things that comes up is a Cincinnati Magazine review article. We were 3 or 4 months old at the Anchor, and it's general practice when a reviewer comes in, they give you a call and you talk to them about your restaurant. And I had mentioned to Donna Corvray, who was at the time was the dining editor of Cincinnati Magazine, that the lobster roll that we serve is this exact same recipe that we served in Brooklyn and at Mary's, and we'd won awards for that. We'd won competitions. There was a lobster roll rumble in New York City that we won a couple years in a row, and I was the guy making that dish.
Yes.
And it was the first thing she talked about in the review, and she says, Derek mentioned that to me twice in a conversation, and this lobster roll is not award winning. And I thought to myself, hey, who still has a job here? Right?
There you go.
Love you, Donna, but
Last word.
last word,
Yeah.
right?
Nobody's complaining about it when they eat it.
No. And she's no longer the dining editor either.
So what is your career and the things that you've done? How does that change your relationship when you go to other places? When you go around town, can you, like, I was in radio for a long time, and so, like, I couldn't listen to the radio because I was critiquing everything that happened.
Oh,
Do you have a
I
hard
love
time?
to eat out. No, I'm a big supporter of everybody in Cincinnati. And I like to go to Chicago. We were just there a couple weeks ago. One of the greatest things that Mary did for me when I first started working at Mary's Fish Camp is she gave me a credit card, and she said, every month I want you to go either buy a bunch of cookbooks or go out to eat on your days off, and this is the restaurant's going to pay for it. And so I still, Jocelyn and I try and go to every new place that opens up. But I think that's essential for a young cook to go and see who's doing what they're using. I mean, if you don't know who's doing what, then you're not in the game.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's funny to see the trends, sort of they come and they go. And ramps are really big here in the Ohio Valley, and at the end of the day, it's an onion, right?
Yeah.
And there's not a lot you can do with onions, although onions are in everything. But we had went to Chicago and we ate at this restaurant called Bad Hunter. I took both my managers, and we ate at this place called Bad Hunter, and they served us this ramp dish that just blew my mind. But the reason it was so good was because it really was subtle. It was just ramps. And everyone's trying to do something else with the ramps,
rather than just letting them be what they are and let them be great.
Yeah.
Is the relationship, is the food community relationship strong here? Or is it competitive in Cincinnati?
I think it's really strong. I think that there are a lot of sort of the elite chefs here in the city really support one another. I think we go back into our kitchens and we're like, I can't believe he's doing this or doing that. But at the end of the day,
but you're still supportive.
Everyone is hugging each other. Yeah, it's a good community.
That's great.
Yeah.
What do you eat that would, that you're not supposed to eat in your current position? Like
where do I go?
What are your embarrassing food predilections?
I don't have any. I'll eat anything.
Are you a particular guy? Or are you sort of like, no, I can go to
I can go to Mac's and order a pizza that I know is frozen and goes through gets reheated. I'm an equal opportunity eater. I will eat anything. Seriously, and it's a lot of it is about place and who I'm with and how I'm feeling. My son just turned 12 on Tuesday, and I took him to Boca. My wife was out of town, but so I took him to Boca, and I asked if the chefs in the kitchen could sign his menu.
Nice.
And they all signed their names and wrote happy birthday, and then they asked if he would like to come back to the kitchen and expedite with Chef Andy Tanner. And so he did, and that's community.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and that's really cool.
Right on. Are your kids do you think they
food snobs? I do. They.
If not even snobs, at least do they appreciate? Do they know?
They do.
Okay.
Julian, who's 12, I catch him watching Baking Network or Baking Channel. Like Cupcake Wars or whatever. My daughter could take it or leave it. I think. She eats only 4 different things. But
she's going to be the athlete in the family.
She's going to be the athlete. Yeah. It's salami, olives, Cliff Bars, and any kind of junk food you can give her.
Love it.
Yeah.
At this point in your career, what motivates you now? I mean, you talked about you've got some goals, you'd like to open another place, but what are you looking for, in your deeper sense?
I'm really excited about what's happening now in Cincinnati. There was a long 18-month renovation of Music Hall. That's back and going. The park is sort of coming. The programming is coming along. It's in full force. People are opening restaurants that are interesting and challenging. And it's good to see the dining public coming out and experiencing different things. 5 years ago, half these places didn't exist. Yeah. And now you'll go to a Spanish tapas place or a wine bar or a diner that serves high-end matzo ball soup, to tasting menus. There never used to be tasting menus in Cincinnati.
Right. And it's good.
And it's good food.
Yeah, consistently good. I mean, that's the thing, is we're getting to the point where, well, I should ask you this. It feels like some of the great places in town now have started to reach a capacity where you're seeing places that aren't consistently great or aren't doing something that you really call out, just can't take it anymore because they're not the only thing doing their thing, the only place
right, so
doing their thing anymore.
I really think that in Cincinnati in particular, we're used to Montgomery Inn ribs, Graders, Skyline, La Rosa's. Those are sort of the staples, and they've been around for a long time. So I think if you're a new restaurant and you have a style of food that you like to do, if you can sort of last 6, 7, 8 years, the general public sort of comes around and they're like, that's a place we have to go to.
Right.
And I feel like the Anchor is sort of getting to that point.
Yeah.
To give you an example, when I first came back into town and was sort of shooting this idea of opening an oyster bar up, people were like, are you crazy? Like an oyster bar in Cincinnati? We're about ready to serve our 400,000 oyster at the Anchor.
Wow.
That's almost 500,000 oysters. That's crazy.
And where you are was a place that like people from the outskirts wouldn't even go when you moved here.
Right.
The West Siders were like, go downtown, it's dangerous.
Right.
Now you got people flocking down to the new music hall,
to eat seafood.
Washington Park, to eat seafood at the Anchor.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing how much it really has changed in that time. What do you feel, what skill do you have that you have always had that you sort of bring to what you do that makes you successful?
I'm compassionate.
Really?
Yeah.
I say really because that's not the answer. I might have expected drive, or I might have expected
I think at the end of the day, there are a lot of people that come through your door, employees or customers, that have either had a bad day or things aren't going quite their way, or either they're gonna sit down, order a plate of food, and have an experience that makes them feel better. On the back end of it, if it's an employee, if you can develop a relationship with someone where you care for them, they're going to care for you, and their work is going to be better, and they're going to produce what you tell them to produce.
Right on. I love that answer.
Yeah, that's...
What do you think? It's interesting. That answer is, I had a question written down here that I sort of wanted to ask you about chef culture in the United States right now, because you do have the Mario Batalis and the Bourdains and all this like rock star chef culture. Everything you just said is the opposite of everything. Like, it seems to me that chef culture, celebrity chef culture...
Well, that's what you
built
see
on
in the
United
media,
States.
I think.
Well, right.
Yeah. Batali is sort of... he's a hard one to sort of talk about, just because he was really sort of the godfather of West Village, how to break out of that mold of being a small business owner, and sort of create an empire. But at the same time, now we've learned that, but we've always sort of known that he was doing things that were unsavory with along the way.
Yep.
But he was definitely someone that, as a young cook, I could look to and say, God, they're really doing really cool stuff over at Poe, and there's Mario, and his cooks will follow him into the street. It doesn't matter. They are hooked on whatever it is he says.
Yeah.
And
do you think that attitudes are changing, that people are, because I do feel like that's something that apart from the media aspect of it, there's kind of this Svengali, like when you get a guy like that, people are like, well, I just have to slog through 10 years of horror and abuse to learn what this guy has to teach me. Is that changing? Are people sort of holding
I think there are a lot of good
standard?
people out there as well. I mean, we only hear about the Ken Friedmans or the Mario Batali and John Besh. I mean, those guys are jerks.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of really, really good people out there doing really good things that are compassionate and caring people and love food and love what they do. Yeah.
So again, the point of the podcast is people talking about work, and sort of my imagining that people might be listening to this, and you got somebody who's like, I care about food, I can cook well at home. It's interesting, your answer about multitasking. I fancy myself a decent cook. I'm off recipe most of the time, but the thing that drives me insane is when something throws off my rhythm. What you said about being able to multitask in the kitchen is the thing I can't do that drives me nuts.
There's a lot of, and I learned this early on, there's a lot of things that sort of you have to pay attention to. And once you've sort of organized those things in your mind, you know what your menu is, and you have to, the ticket comes in, as well as 15 to 20 other tickets, and you have to organize all that stuff in your head, who's cooking what, how long things take to cook. Then you have servers coming in giving you special instructions, so that has to be taken into account. Then you have to remember it, and then it's on a timing thing, right? So everything's got to come up and then it has to go out.
Yeah.
I do have a funny story. In the beginning of the Anchor, was really crazy busy. It was, there must have been a show or something, and I was overwhelmed with all of the tickets in the window and trying to keep it all straight. A server came back, and she was on her cell phone. And I was like, "What are you doing on your cell phone?" And she was like, "I'm trying to find."
Live recording.
Yeah, I'm trying to find directions for a customer. No, I assumed that she was on her cell phone because she was just on her cell phone.
Texting
She was
somebody.
or texting somebody.
Yeah.
She was actually trying to do something good and trying to find directions for a customer. But I snapped and I yelled at her. And she's like, "You know what? Deuces." And she walked out of the kitchen. And I didn't know what deuces meant, so I turned to my food runner and I was like, "What the hell did that mean?" And she's like, "It means she quit."
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh, she left." But yeah, so that shows you my age a little bit, that I didn't know
Well, yeah.
what that urban
also,
slang is, but
No, but it also
She's out.
Sounds to me like you have changed over the course of this. You just said that your greatest skill, you feel like now that you bring to it, that experiences like that have made you a different person in terms of how you run your
right.
restaurant.
I mean, there's all these moments that you collect over time, and you're like, "Well, how would I handle that differently?" And
you actually the capacity to learn from him instead of
right,
saying
and to say, "Well, let's not react right away. Let's."
right.
9 times out of 10, if you don't react, you get a much better result.
Yep.
But
So give us last question. I really appreciate you spending the time with us. Give us your insight into, you said that ramps are crazy in Cincinnati. What's going on in food culture that you as a chef are seeing that the general listener is not seeing, that people could clue into? What should they be searching out or looking for that's kind of the next thing that's happening?
well,
An ingredient,
ingredient.
style.
Well, I was going to say styles of restaurants are changing. One thing that I sort of grew up in sort of these very small, independently owned restaurants that there were no rules. You just did what you felt you wanted to do. Now places are becoming more streamlined, and I want to call it the McDonaldization of restaurants. Like, there's one menu that never changes. There are specials that come in, based on seasonality, but if you can get everything streamlined, there will always be that cocktail or that dish on the menu.
Yeah.
Then you've sort of become a success. And it's less about, to me anyway, it's less about having a passion for a region or a cuisine or a place, and more about how can I get these 25 people in under an hour and the next 25 people in. So it's in some ways it's kind of a sad thing because the personality of the restaurant doesn't shine through as much anymore.
Yeah.
I'm not going to call out names or anything, but I'll go to a place and it's the same menu that I saw a year ago.
Yeah. I was just talking to my neighbor last night. We were standing out on the street, and she said that she had heard somebody talking about a place. I don't think it's a Cincinnati place. I think it's just a thing that's happening where, it sounds like I'm making it up, where there's like robots making noodles.
Yeah.
You've heard about this. I have not. It's like, I thought food was one of the last places that we could actually trust that there were people involved. Like the transactional nature of somebody making something to provide sustenance for you was something that we could rely on.
We've gotten away from that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, as we are in so many other areas of our society.
Right.
But you can still find
good places.
people like you making good food,
Right.
sourcing good ingredients, taking
Right.
care of the people where they come from,
Right.
and getting out of the way.
Yep.
Well, Derek, thank you so much. It's been a
Thank
pleasure
you.
to talk to you. I really
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing your experience with us.
Absolutely.
This episode of The Distiller was recorded live on location at Old Kentucky Bourbon Bar on the Mainstrasse in Covington, Kentucky. Thanks a million to Jeff Brandt and the OKBB staff for the bourbon and the hospitality. And again, if you're a bourbon drinker and you haven't been to Old Kentucky Bourbon Bar, you're missing out. Visit thedistillerpodcast.com, where we link to Old Kentucky Bourbon Bar's website, where you can see their specials and their entire, fairly substantive collection of bourbons. Many thanks again also to Derek Dos Anjos. He was the host of our first episode, and he was a great guest for this one. Again, Derek is the owner and the head chef of the Anchor OTR at 1401 Race Street in Over the Rhine, Cincinnati, Ohio. You can learn more about Derek and find links to both the Anchor OTR and Mary's Fish Camp in New York's West Village, as well as photos from the episode, all at thedistillerpodcast.com. The Distiller is produced, recorded, and hosted by me, Brandon Dawson, with co-production and booking from Terry Heist. Our show is mixed and edited by Justin Golden. Photography is by Kyle Wolf. Our logo was designed by Scott Ryan, and our videos are by Mike Helm of Minute Moments Pictures. You can find The Distiller wherever you listen to podcasts, and now you can find The Distiller on YouTube, where we have closed caption versions of our audio podcasts for the hearing impaired. Please do subscribe to be notified when new episodes are released, and if you like what you hear, please rate or review The Distiller wherever you listen so others can find out how to do so as well. Don't forget you can download episodes and find more information, including links, photos of the guests, and a map of all the show locations, and you can get in touch with us at thedistillerpodcast.com or do it by email, mail@thedistillerpodcast.com. You can suggest people you think should be on the show to talk about their search for meaningful work, somewhere interesting we should record the show, or something interesting we can drink while we do it. And whether by email, on the website, or on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, we always love to hear from you. Until next time, thanks for listening. Bye-bye.